Judges chapter 2. I'm going to begin reading in verse 6 and read through the end of the chapter. And I'm reading from the New American Standard Version of the Bible. You please follow along with whatever translation of God's Word that you have with you this morning. Judges chapter 2, beginning in verse 6. When Joshua had dismissed the people, the sons of Israel went each one to his inheritance to possess the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, the ones who had seen all the great work of the Lord which he had done for Israel. And then Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. They buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gadash. And all the generation also were gathered to their fathers. All that generation also were gathered to their fathers. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. Verse 11 says, Then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. The Baals plural because there were multiple forms. That was the common Palestinian deity of that day. And they forsook the Lord, verse 12 says, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they followed other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and they bowed themselves down to them. Thus they provoked the Lord to anger. So they forsook the Lord, and they served Baal, and they served Ashtaroth, the other common deity. Baal was male, Ashtaroth was female. Verse 14 says, The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he gave them into the hands of the plunderers who plundered them. And he sold them into the hands of their enemies around them, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. There were no more Jerichos in the days of the judges. Wherever they went, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had spoken and as the Lord had sworn to them, so that they were severely distressed. And then the Lord raised up judges, who delivered them from the hands of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges. For they played the harlot after other gods and bowed themselves down to them. They turned aside quickly from the way in which their fathers had walked in obeying the commandments of the Lord. They did not do as their fathers. And when the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed and afflicted them. But it came about when the judge died that they would turn back and act more corruptly than their fathers, in following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not abandon their practices or their stubborn ways. So the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he said, Because this nation has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and has not listened to my voice, I will also no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel by them, whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk in it as their fathers did or not. So the Lord allowed those nations to remain, not driving them out quickly, and he did not give them into the hand of Joshua. Joshua in the sense of God's people there. Well, we had a great time last weekend, yes? Amen. Oh, come on now. We had a great time last weekend, yes? Yeah, we really did. In just 3 services, I was amazed at how much biblical ground that Brooks covered in 3 he took us in just 3 sermons from Joshua's call. Remember, what were the terms of the call? Be strong and courageous. He took us from that call to the victory at Jericho. Why was there victory at Jericho? Because they obeyed God's directions. They obeyed the will of God. And then he took us from that victory at Jericho to the disaster at Ai because they were not obedient to God's directions. And then he took us to Joshua's final conference with the nation. Remember what Joshua said to the nation at the end of his life? You do what you want, but as for me and my house, what? We will serve the Lord. That's right. Now, Brooks didn't know it, but he did me a favor. He set me up. We didn't talk about this, but I think he set the timing for me. It has been on my heart for a long time to preach through the book of Judges, the book that immediately follows the story of Joshua. So I can't think of a better time to go ahead and do that than right now. So we're going to go into the book of Judges, and I want to warn you up front, the book of Judges is a tough book. It has got some strange and bizarre stories in it. But let me ask you, how many of you like a good story? All right, you're going to love Judges because there's some stories in Judges. And you will come out and folks will say, well, what did you do at church? Well, you won't believe the story the preacher told today. Well, it's not the story the preacher told. It's all in Judges. The book is a tough book because it alternates all throughout the book, back and forth between Israel's incredible stubbornness and failures, and then between that and God's incredible faithfulness and compassion for his people. Now, who doesn't need to hear a story like that? Who doesn't need to hear about our sinfulness and God's faithfulness? Anybody in the house? I hope not. The book of Judges, here's why this is such a great book. The book of Judges helps us get our eyes wide open on who we really are. And it helps us get our eyes wide open on who God really is and what it's like. So I hope you'll enjoy the book, but it's a tough book. And we're starting here, you think, well, why are we starting in chapter 1? We're starting in chapter 2 because this particular passage sets the tone and the basic pattern for the book. This passage actually picks up here in verse 6 at that last conference in Joshua chapter 24 when Joshua sat down with Israel and said, you need to make your choice. Do what you're going to do, but let me give you an example. In Joshua 24, that was the last sermon that Brooks preached for us, Joshua said to the people, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And so chapter 2, verse 6, right here, says that when Joshua dismissed the people, it's taking us back to that conference in the book of Joshua. When Joshua dismissed the people, they each went their own way. They each went to the part of the promised land that God had given to them and their tribe, and their job was to go and take the land. That was their job. Verse 7, the very next verse, tells us something very important. And to get it, to see what's happening, verse 7 is big news, but to see what's happening, you've got to remember the rest of the conversation in that last conference that Joshua had with the people. You remember what Joshua said? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Well, if you read the rest of that story in Joshua 24, you read that all the families of Israel, all the people of Israel, when Joshua said that, they all chimed in and said, us too, we will serve the Lord. And you would think that having said that Joshua would have probably walked around and the opposite. What Joshua says in the rest of that chapter is, now I don't think so. Can you imagine that? You go to a revival meeting, everybody raises their hand and says, yes, we'll follow the Lord. And the preacher says, no, I doubt it. Well, that's encouraging, isn't it? Joshua said, yeah, based on the performance that I've seen from y'all lately, I'm not convinced. I don't think you have a chance. And here's the biblical version. Here's what Joshua said back in chapter 24 of that book. You will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God and a jealous God. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here. He will not forgive your regular and often sins. You're going to wear God out. I see it coming. He will not tolerate your inconsistent worship when you feel like it, when it's convenient, and your divided, distracted hearts. You're worried about everything except what you ought to be worried about. Now, back to the more biblical language. After all that he has done for you, he will turn and consume you. That's what Joshua said. Now, knowing about that conversation, now let's look at verse 7 here. Chapter 2, verse 7 of the book of Judges. Verse 7 says, and the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua. In other words, all the folks who had seen great works of the Lord. And then look at verse 11. In verse 11, it's like somebody turned off the switch. Verse 11 says, and then when that generation was gone, Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Canaanite gods, and forsook the Lord who had brought them out of Egypt. Now, how do you imagine God felt at that point? God brought them out of Egypt. He sent the plagues on Egypt. He divided the Red Sea. He took them through the wilderness. He fed them every day with manna. He opened up the Jordan River. They crossed over on dry land. They're in the land. He gives them victory at Jericho. He begins to drive out the peoples of the land so that they can inherit the promised land. And Israel's response after one generation is, well, I think I found something a little better. One generation. And it's all over. You get the impression that those folks were staying in church. They didn't have church, of course, in the Old Testament, but I'm just using that as an expression of speech. You get the impression that they stayed in church just to keep the old man happy. And they respected Joshua. They knew he'd been a great leader. They appreciated what he did. So they kind of stayed on track, at least publicly, as long as he was alive. Didn't want to disappoint Grandpa. Didn't want to disappoint Grandpa's buddies and his cousins and all the guys in that generation, the old gang. Wanted to respect their wishes, so they stayed in church. They stayed on the straight and narrow. They stayed on the level, sort of. But just within a couple of verses, we're told, when that group was gone, the gloves came off. And apparently the gloves have been coming off a long time behind the scenes, because it just didn't take long for them to go all out after Baal and Ashtaroth. I mean, it just happened just like that. So let me teach you something from this passage. Let me give you a lesson here. Here's lesson number 1. You need to understand this, especially young people. I try not to target you in my sermons, but you're targeted today. And by young people, I mean everybody younger than me, which is almost everybody. If your faith is not real, if your faith is not personal, it won't last. I want you to understand. It is easy and it is appealing for younger members members of a family to be regular in church and sort of good to please mom and dad, or grandma and grandpa, or even husband and wife. But if that's all that's happening, if the only reason you're here is to please somebody else, let me just tell you, it's not real and it's not going to last. Mark it down, compulsion is not the same thing as devotion. There's a good tweet for you. See that? Compulsion is not the same thing as devotion. Appeasing someone else is not the same thing as real faith. Real faith that makes a real difference in how you live your life and think your thoughts is never going to be something you do for someone in your family. It's got to be something that you do for Jesus alone. Every man, every woman, every boy, and every girl must have their own personal relationship with God. You cannot ride to heaven on a family member's coattails. Right? And let me just tell you, if you haven't understood what I've said yet, let me make it more plain. If you have never really personally meant business with God and you're just going through the motions until you get out from under the influence of somebody that you care about, then what I would say to you is quit fooling around and get something personal going with God. And here's the problem. The more you fool around, the more you waste time, the more you fake it, the less chance you have of ever getting right with God and having the real thing in your life. Because self-deception will become a regular and nearly unbreakable habit in your life. And you'll think, well, I'm fine. I'm at the church with mom and dad. That's lesson number one. Right on the heels of lesson number one is lesson number two. When your relationship with God is not real, and you go the other way, it's going to boomerang very hard. Look at verse 11 again, if you would. Verse 11 says, "And as soon as the old generation was off the scene, Israel took off for Baal. They served the Baals, all of them. Baal number one, Baal number two, Baal number three, all the different forms of Baal, they served them all." And verse 13 says, they not only worshiped Baal, they worshiped Ashtaroth. Now, I understand you're not everybody's the kind of nerd that I am. And you may not be terribly interested in long, detailed descriptions of ancient deities of the Middle East. And how many would like to sign up for that later? Okay, one or two diehards, but all right. But I need to make a point here, and so I'll do it as quickly as possible. Baal and Ashtaroth were fertility gods. In the Palestinian mind, they controlled the rain, and they controlled crop growth, and they were responsible for lots of calves and baby sheep. And all the farmers and the ranchers said, "Amen." So in order to honor the fertility gods, the worshipers would get drunk and have orgies. They acted out what they hoped the deities would do for them and their crops and their herds. And if children resulted, if pregnancies resulted from that, they sacrificed the children. Here's what I'm getting at. To go from one generation is offering sacrifices to God and singing His praise and saying, "Lord, you are holy." To go from that in one generation and in the very next generation to participate in drunkenness and ritual promiscuity, that is a pretty it's so imperative that you get real with God, because you'll end up damaging your life dramatically when you get loose from the last generation's influence if you don't have a personal relationship with the Lord. Lesson number 3 is the good news. There's a little bit of good news here. In verse 18, we're told that when Israel would just kind of constantly get themselves in trouble, that God would raise up judges to help them. Look at verse 18. I want you to see that. Because he was moved with pity for his people. How God continues to love and forgive us, I do not know. But I'm glad it does. Amen. And I want you to know that God's door will always be open for you, and the sooner you turn to him, the better off you'll be. And that's because of the final lesson in this passage that I want you to see. Lesson number 4. Look at the end of the chapter. Look at verses 21, 22, 23. In these last verses, we're told that God drew a line in the sand with Israel because the book of Judges shows us that they continued to rebel. They continued to rebel. They continued to rebel because they continued to ignore God, because they continued to be stubborn against him, because they just refused to let God have any part in their life. We're told in those last 3 verses that God had to let them learn their lessons the hard way. Verse 21, God said that because Israel had refused and refused, he would no longer give them favor. He would no longer drive out their enemies. He would no longer help them. This is a divine version of, you've made your bed, now get in. In verse 22, God says that maybe, if they stew in it long enough, they will come to their senses. Look what he says. In order to test them, whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk in it as their fathers did or not. God says, I've given them everything I can give them. They're going to have to learn this lesson the hard way. Story of the book of Judges. Some very interesting, at times strange stories. Is the story of God's people stewing in their own spiritual stupidity, and God trying to draw them back to himself. So there you have it. That's the pattern. That's the introduction. These are the big questions that we will hear over and over in this book. Where is your faith? Where is your faith placed? Is it real? Are you just trying to please someone else, or do you have a relationship with God? And if you don't have a relationship with God, what's going to happen if you keep going down this path? And how long will it take you to come to your senses? That's the story of the book of Judges. I realize that I have preached a sermon that it will be difficult to respond to. After a sermon like that, one wants to walk the aisle and say, I've been so spiritually stubborn. But I want you to hear what's in this book. And if you've heard something that God has placed on your heart, don't be afraid to respond to it. You know, it really doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about your life. It matters what God thinks about your life. And that's the person you should please. Will you stand and pray? Father, preach your word. And now, Father, beginning today, we have to follow up on that experience. That was a great high. Now we need to do the work of living that out, day by day, week by week. So we ask, Father, for your favor to rest on us. We do not want to live our lives as Israel did in the book of Judges, turning away from your favor over and over. Instead, Father, we want to seek you out. We want to honor you. We want to live for you. And so our prayer this morning, Father, is speak to us, guide us, direct us. Help us, Father, if there is any decision that we need to pray about, that we'll feel free to spend time at the altar. Help us, Father, if there's any decision that we need to share with your people, that we would make it joyfully and say to this congregation, I want you to pray for me. Walk with us, Father. We want to walk with you. That's our prayer today, and we ask you